We're going to talk about democratizing brain health. Now, as we heard earlier today, there's a distinct possibility, of course, that people will be living longer. However, with longer lifespan, the incidence of neurodegenerative diseases increases. Alzheimer's and other dementias are often cited as the biggest fears people have about old age. Currently, 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or dementia. Our next speaker asks an intriguing question: what if we could vaccinate against those diseases? Please welcome Lois, Garfield, Reese.
Thanks, everybody. Also, full disclosure, I'm not a doctor. Okay, so I wanted to thank Kira and Dr. Smith and the Council for Culture for having me. And in line with the doctor comment, heads up disclosure, I'm highly likely the least qualified person in the room. And it's nice, but it's also terrifying. And my wife often tells me that what I lack in expertise, I make up for in exuberance. So just keep that in mind. So I'm not a real slide guy, but I've got some. And I want to start with a question. So we've heard a lot about life and people living longer and all this stuff, but if everybody in this room could just let me know, the average life expectancy in the US is 80. In a room full of unbelievably high achievers, right? How many of you think you're going to be above average there?
At 80, you mean?
Yeah. Okay. So, sobering fact, not the most positive fact. The reality is that 1 out of 2 people over 85 will have Alzheimer's. And as we get older than that, as we extend that longevity horizon, more will have Alzheimer's. So let me ask this question in a slightly different way, right? How many of you would like to live for that last 20 plus years with Alzheimer's?
No, thanks.
Okay, so there's usually a lot less hands. So the idea here is, after listening to Cardinal Ravasi, who was amazing, by the way, I started thinking about humanism and longevity and where we fit into all this stuff. And I'm going to provide some absolutely inaccurate definitions, but that's the basis for what I'm going to think through. So humanism. Humanism really fundamentally means that we should have treatments for everybody, that we should be direct and honest in our approach to flatten the health curve. And it means that we should do our best to eliminate suffering when we see it. Now, these are lessons that sound really basic, and for a lot of people they are, but it's worth realizing that that's what we're all doing. The other thing is this longevity concept. So just as Dr. Collins and a bunch of others have touched upon, living a really long time is awesome, but only while you're healthy. So the trick here is how do you live a really long life, and how do you live that life well? Most of the wisdom that I've gained, which is a very limited amount, came from my 2 kids. They're 4 and 6. And one time I was with my son and my daughter, and we were sitting in a third world country with a friend of ours who lived there. And my son came up to me and he said, "Dad, our friend makes $500 a year. And you just bought a $2,000 ukulele. What's up with that?" And I could have told him something about, an Ayn Randian philosophy. It would have been fine. But instead I looked at him, I thought real hard, and I said, I'm a hypocrite. And I had to explain that because he's 6. And once we got through that, I realized that if we're gonna say and believe that people are equal, we actually have to do that. Right? It's great to have these principles, but it's so amazing if we can live by those principles. And so the idea was, why don't we democratize medicine? Why don't we democratize health? Why don't we have a goal of providing safe and effective solutions to great diseases and incurable problems? And why don't we do that in a fundamentally accessible way? So, it turns out that the biggest problems of today are not insignificant, and they're really tricky. And so it's shocking to me to realize at a longevity-focused conference that for the last 2 years in a row in the United States, we've actually lost years of life. And it looks like we're going to do it for a third. Now, if that happens, and we have 3 years of declining longevity, it'll be the first time in 100 years. It'll be the first time since the Spanish flu that happened. So what's doing that, right? There's got to be a problem. What is it? Well, for me, the culprit is chronic disease, and it's led by Alzheimer's. And as you can see, there's also a very significant opioid driver, but AD is the 6th leading cause of death in the US. It's the only disease in the top 10 that's rapidly accelerating, and it's something that is just fundamentally devastating. And these are destroying our hard-won gains against longevity. These are taking that back, and they're doing it en masse, and it's an epidemic. It's the definition of an epidemic. So what does all that stuff mean? Well, the good news is we've overcome epidemics in the past, so there's a lot of hope. And how did we do it? So on the left, there's a picture of the iron lung. These were the best treatment of the day. These kept thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids alive. And they did it for $1,500 a machine, which was the cost of a middle-class house then. And for many, it was the only treatment. We have a friend in Dallas that's been in one for 40-something years, one of the last working iron lungs. So communities were under siege. This was an attack on our children. Places of worship were closed. Pools were closed. Places of congregation and general mingling were closed. Travel was restricted. I mean, it was frightening, and it was something that was every day and ever present. Until Jonas Salk developed a vaccine and eradicated the disease. Now, what's cool about that to me is that this is about the human potential, right? This is about the brain being used through innovation to solve the biggest problems that are out there. So we've done it before, we're gonna do it again. And it didn't stop there. It didn't stop with this challenge. In fact, I would argue that the most successful and prolific medication for humankind ever has been vaccines. And so Jonas Salk started what became a vaccine revolution. So another question, I know this is like not the format, but raise your hand if you've ever been vaccinated for anything. Okay, cool. So you guys congratulations, everybody just joined this super selective group of over 6 billion people that have been vaccinated. 6 billion people. And now there are over 20 vaccine preventable diseases. And these are all around the world, as you can see from the image. So along with sanitation and reducing infant mortality, it's been a critical tool. Vaccine technology is a critical tool in enabling and doubling our lifespan over the last century, let's say. And we've gotten pretty good at it, right? You know, I mean, if we think about Ebola, that was pretty fast, right? But these are infectious diseases. What about chronic diseases? What about endogenous targets, right? How can we safely unleash the immune system? Seems like an oxymoron. Train the immune system to tackle endogenous targets and fundamentally alter the course of these agents of chronic disease. And that concept seems super easy, right? I mean, I can say it fast, seems great. But the reality is that it's really hard. The body's smart, and it doesn't normally like to attack itself. When it does, you have autoimmune diseases. And when the people that have tried these endogenous target or these endogenous vaccines, they can't really get the body to respond. That's one problem, so limited response. Or they rile up the immune system so much that you have major safety concerns. So it's either too little or too much, but there's no Goldilocks solution. So, and this is the part that I kind of like, right? We've done it, right? So that's cool. So this milestone has been reached. And we did it by investing 20 years of time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears, and people like yourselves that are, brilliant, doing work that matters. And so over the last 20 years, we've developed the first fully synthetic vaccine that was ever approved, both for infectious disease and also for an endogenous target. And right now we vaccinate 500 million pigs a year, which sounds like a lot until you think about it, and it's a whole lot of pigs. And the idea is that we do this for less than $1 a dose, and we have over 50% margins. So you can do something that can scale, you can do something that's global, you can do something that is fundamentally accessible to every single person in the world that needs it. And we can do that now. So this is not a future thing, this is something that can actually happen. And if you think about it right now, there's only 4 vaccines in the world that are approved for animals or for humans against an endogenous target. And I think, and I've looked at this pretty much, but I could be wrong, I think we're the only one that's using a novel platform technology to do that. And so that gives me great hope. It gives me great hope to go after more and more targets and do more and more things. And so we've been able, I guess, really effectively to harness and safely harness the immune system and direct it to specific targets, endogenous targets. So now what are we going to do with that? So I call this the vaccine revolution 2.0, right? And the idea is that if you can have safe, efficacious, convenient technologies, then because of that safety, you can actually potentially prevent these diseases before they start. And if you can do it with a platform technology that allows you to do it for a fraction of the cost of any other option, then you can do it in a way that's accessible to everybody. So these are some of our collaborators. And this is what we're doing today. So right now, our lead compound is for Alzheimer's, and then we've got on its heels products for Parkinson's, other forms of Alzheimer's, neuroinflammation, opioid replacements, particularly for the safe control of chronic pain, and muscular regeneration. There's a bunch of other targets that are going to come on, but these are just the ones that are kind of front and foremost in our thoughts. And I'm going to digress for just a second and talk about the lead program, Alzheimer's. So this is a before picture of a traditional brain image by PET that shows amyloid. The red is the amyloid. And my thesis is, what if we could remove that, right? What if we could safely take that out and remove the plaque deposit? And that's what that after picture looks like. So, that would be unbelievably exciting. That would be like a major step forward. And so these are some of the challenges that are in the field. If you look at it, Alzheimer's starts really early. And that's hard because these proteins build up, and they build up over a long period of time, and you don't have any symptoms in that period, right? So fundamentally going after this is a long and uncertain pathway, right? And it's uncertain for a number of reasons, which makes sense, but that's one of the challenges in the field. And it also means that as you do this, you end up with a lack of incentive to be in the space because of the condensed IP lifespan. And Alzheimer's obviously gets a significantly smaller amount of funding than a lot of these other things. Cancer and HIV would be two good examples. So now this is the part that is fun for me. It's that everything is impossible until it's finished. I get told a lot that things are really hard and that can't happen and that there's been failures, and I don't see any of those as failures. When a plane crashes, before the first plane took flight, was it a failure? No, it was one of the many fields of learnings. These are opportunities to figure out how to balance the weight, how to move the wings differently, how to add new rudders. And then what happens is, as the industry, the New York Times itself came out and said that man will never never fly. We'll float, not fly. And 2 years later, we flew. And 5 years after that, one of the leading scientists of the time, Lord Haldane, refused to acknowledge that we had done it. There had been dozens of flights publicized around the world at that stage, and he refused to believe that it had happened. So it's my belief that we're in the equivalent of 1903, the end of 1903 right now. We've built a platform that's safe and can generate these highly specific endobodies to tackle some of the largest problems facing humankind. But as Lord Haldane clearly demonstrates, it takes time for the establishment and these truths to be upended. So with epidemics of this magnitude, with suffering so great, we don't have any time to wait. This is an urgent battle, and it's something that we're honored to be a part of trying to solve. So thanks.
Lou, thank you. And unfortunately, we're running short on time, but I do have one question, because I've followed Alzheimer's a lot. My father passed away with Alzheimer's. You said you vaccinated an awful lot of people already against plaque and removed a lot of the plaque. My understanding, because a lot of people have done similar sorts of things, but that the plaque doesn't correlate very well with the clinical picture of dementia. So what makes you think it's going to work then simply by removing the plaque?
Yeah, so I think like most problems, the silver bullet doesn't really kill the werewolf. That's just a good movie, right? I think that most problems involve a team, they involve a community, they involve an ecosystem. We didn't get the space because of one person, we got the space because an ecosystem was unleashed and developed around it. It took gauges, it took screens, it took new machinery, it took better rockets, it took a whole slew of an ecosystem that made that happen. And that's exactly what's happening in Alzheimer's now, with an increase in imaging, with an increase in biomarkers, with better understanding of the way the brain works. And particularly in the genetic population, there's a very clear tie, or a much clearer tie, to the plaque and the pathology. So I think that that's really a great opportunity there. And I think that, one of the reasons that we look at tau and we look at alpha-syn is that I think that there's a symphony playing here that leads to a spectrum of the disease. And I think that what it's going to take is it's going to take a multi-pronged approach like most problems. And so I see a great opportunity to figure that out. And I think that, we've got a really, I don't know anybody, and I've talked to a couple people that say, what if you could take plaque out of your brain? And everybody says, if you can safely take it out of my brain, I'd like it out of my brain. And I think that the trick here is that what if it does work, right? What if you can go early enough? What if you can stop the neurodegeneration before it sets in? What if you can get early in that disease and stop the progression and the accumulation of the plaque deposits? I think that's really where it's going to work out.
May need to move it much earlier in the
I think it's as early as you can get there, and as well as you can understand it is I think that's the best thing to do. I think the sooner you can get there, the more you have an opportunity to change that inflection and bend the curve.
Bend the curve.
Exactly.
Very good.
Yeah.
Lou Garfield, Reese, thank you very much. Thank you all. And I will now turn it over to our next moderator. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.